Today I will talk a little bit about using animations in React. So why do we want to use React for our animations? The JavaScript animations that we know and may or may not love require manipulation of the DOM. React handles that DOM manipulation through the virtual DOM. And so handling our animations through React can help prevent conflicts between the DOM and the virtual DOM and keep that DOM tree clean, which makes React very, very happy. The React group at Facebook has actually created a React transition group that can help to facilitate transitions in React and handling our lifecycle hooks and controlling our components while they transition. This gives us, when we're rendering the transition group components, we need to place them inside a React transition group component. As you can see here in the center, we have our components to undergo transition wrapped inside that transition group. Wrapping them inside the React transition groups gives us these added lifecycle hooks. We have the component will appear, which has a required callback, and that is going to be called at the same time as component did mount for the React transition group itself. So this is only called on transition elements that are already inside the transition group when the transition group is mounted on the page. After the callback is called and component will appear, we move on to component did appear. As you can see, it's called after the callback of component will appear. After the transition group is already mounted, if we add a component inside of it, then we get the component will enter, which also has a required callback. So this is a child of the transition group. After that callback is called, we get the component did enter hook. Then when our component leaves, we have a component will leave, which has a required callback. This is called when a child is removed from the React transition group. It will remain on the DOM until that callback is called. And then we have component did leave, which is called after the callback of component will leave, and this occurs at the same time as component will unmount for the child component. So that transition group is still mounted. In order to facilitate CSS transitions and doing simple animations that way, the React CSS Transition Group is another add-on based on the React transition group. And this will handle those lifecycle hooks for us. So we don't have to worry about our callbacks. We don't have to worry about what is happening when or where. It works by adding classes to the components that are inside the CSS transition group at those specific lifecycle hooks. We do lose access to the lifecycle hooks though, so if we need more control over our app, we have to go back to the React transition group. So we can see an example of this by rendering a simple image carousel. So here we have our CSS transition group. There are some important parameters needed on our CSS transition group. We must give it a transition name. Here we have given it the name carousel. And that carousel is going to be used so we can do our CSS styling for those CSS transitions. And we're not currently using an appear transition. We only have a transition on enter and a transition on leave, which both have a timeout of 4,000 milliseconds or 4 seconds. And then we are rendering our image inside our transition group. So now we can take a look at what our CSS styling will need to look like. So we have these 4 added CSS classes now. We have our enter, which is called at the same time as will enter, and then our carousel enter active is the same time as did enter hook. Our carousel leave occurs at the same time as our will leave hook, and our carousel leave active class is applied on carousel did leave. So here we did two simple transitions. We have an opacity transition and a transformation. So this will go from opacity 1 or 0.01 to 1 on enter and go from 100 view width, so off the right side of the screen to the center, and then on leave it does the opposite. And this is a way that we can handle those CSS transitions within React. And you can see our transition times should be the same as our transition times in the transition group component, and they are required in both places. So we can see an example of this. If I click on a different image, one image slides out, the next image slides in, and this is all done using React and CSS styling. Now, there are some limitations to the React CSS Transition Group. You are limited to running only one animation at the time, and your React component will stay on the DOM until that animation has completed. Also, the animations must exist in order for the components to leave the DOM. So if you forget to put a transition between carousel leave and carousel leave active, if you do not put a CSS transition there, it will be stuck on the DOM. And we can see some of these limitations if we go back to the code. If I click on these multiple times, we start to get lots of images in here, because even though React is adding one component to the DOM and removing another one, you can actually end up with all three images on here, because that image will actually not leave the DOM until the animation is complete, even though technically you only have one image rendered inside the component. So that's one of our limitations. So you would need to have some prevention of your users clicking buttons multiple times, or have the animations run a lot faster. They are slowed down for demonstration purposes. We can also look, I created a little sandbox here so we can do some different things. So this has an on enter. Say slide in on enter. The size, changing the size of your divs do not work well on appear or on enter, but they do work well on leaving. So right now, if I click on one of these, when we leave, it should go to a height of 0, a width of 0, and it's going to do a transformation to move it to the left. So our boxes kind of slide over and leave. We can change our leaving. So instead of going to it, we can keep our height the same and just reduce our width. So we slide one out, it'll slide over. Instead of going to the left, we can slide down and fade away. Can just add some more things here to look at. And so once again, if you when I clicked on add item, the animation stopped. It's very synchronous. It doesn't allow for asynchronous actions here. So we can slide that one down and away. There are a lot of different things you can do with the CSS transitions that now you can use React for. As you can see, this on enter hook has a size transition. The size transitions work if the size is different from your final size, but if your active size is the same as your final size, it does not do a transition. So that's another little bug in the CSS transition group that just does not work out for us. We can make everything move very far away as I get smaller. So this way, if you have components on your DOM and you want to take them away and add them, it just prevents them from just kind of magically appearing and snapping into place and pushing everything out of the way. You can have it done slowly. And if you're interested in doing more complicated animations, there is another library that includes more advanced animations called React Motion. And this allows you to add some spring-like physics and multiple animations within one component. But I'm not going to get into that today. And thank you for listening to this talk.